especially we of course know we had a high exposure to transportation, and obviously aerospace and automotive were quite early hit by the pandemic, both in terms of a sudden lack of demand for new airplanes, but of course also many of the disruptions that happened in the factories themselves producing cars, for example. And we were expecting quite a significant drop, both on the demand side, but also obviously on the supply side, and a major surplus in the market. And of course, if we look at the situation last May when this presentation was held, prices of the LME were significantly down, mostly because we know that, of course, supply in aluminium is not really that flexible. It takes quite a bit of time and effort and cost to bring down an aluminium smelter. We were seeing quite a lot of curtailment nevertheless, and also some closures, both in the aluminium and alumina sectors. So I think demand came back quite at an almost unexpected pace for aluminium. This is reflected also in the very positive price development of the LME and the SHFE as well. It's going to be a very interesting question to see what kind of production discipline are we going to see in China. On one hand, we're hearing that there's quite a push to move production indeed to provinces such as Yunnan, where there's hydropower. On the other hand, closing down from areas such as Inner Mongolia or Shandong. But there seems to be an overarching theme of potentially China not promoting added production anymore in aluminium, but rather focusing on a cap and greenifying the production footprint. But of course, time will tell whether that discipline will really be there, because if it does, and we do see a bit of a cap in their production, that will of course open market opportunities for many other regions in terms of production and create a bit of space for new investments.
Antti had spoken about the slump in demand, but supply hadn't followed, and this is reflected in the chart on the left. So aluminium pretty much ending last year in a big surplus, 1.5 million tons. It was only really copper, lead and tin that were in deficit. So in theory, price supportive. Aluminium in surplus, the price perhaps shouldn't be performing at all. Bearing in mind that the surplus is reflected in relatively high stock levels on the LME and on the SHFE exchange in China. Clearly, the massive central bank government stimulus, over $13 billion has been injected into the global economy. That, of course, is lifting asset classes, equities, commodities, and so on. And everything appears to do quite well, including aluminium, in an inflationary macro environment that we have today. Of course, we should see a strong rebound in consumption, over 6% year on year this year, while there is some evidence perhaps that production growth is slowing. We can see again highlights of this oversupply in the market, and that's been pretty much evident now for a number of years, highlighted I think very clearly in the market balance picture on the right hand side, that we've had a couple of decades of substantial oversupply, no shortage of stocks both reported on the exchanges, but also a build-up of off-market stocks that are available there to cushion perhaps any price increase or any shortage coming from China because of their new green infrastructure policies that we've heard about.
We saw ourselves going through the pandemic with sustained operations with much lower margins, because we went down from VAP to P1020, and the price also was down, hovered around the $1,300, $1,400 a ton. So low margins, very tough passage through the pandemic. and we finally recovered, but we're also hit by a series of tariff situations, confrontations with the US. The demand was affected out of China. There was a tremendous reduction in demand, and the situation picked up as we see here at the end of the fourth quarter of 2020. And then we're almost back to a more normal situation. China picked up much faster and much bigger than anyone expected. What we can see here very clearly is the price is picking up, and so is the Midwest premium as demand increases, and we went for a restocking phase, and now we see that we are in a more regular cycle, but this is all very fragile. It also will be predicated on how the Rebuild America unfolds, and how the demand in the rest of the world also develops. There will be an increase in the use of aluminium in the coming years, mostly driven by EV. The aerospace is a big question mark at this point in time. The only thing that we know is that right now it's down for all the reasons that we know.
Heard about the slump in the aerospace, the autos markets, very key sectors for aluminum, and they're rebounding, but it's going to take time. We obviously have a chip shortage around the world, so that's imperiling auto production. We've seen VW, Toyota announcing some production slowdown because of the semiconductor shortage. So the recovery is going to be up and down, I would say, over the coming months. But when we get back to pre-COVID levels of economic growth globally, but also metals demand growth globally, then I think the central banks can start to withdraw the support.
There's too many factors on which we have no control, including governments. And to give you an example, our situation in Canada as an industry is that our market is not Canada, it's the US. So our future is predicated on the way the US economy will pick up and the pace at which it will do it. There's nothing we can do about it. We can only be there and keep producing and hope that we will return to pre-pandemic situation. And let's not forget that even before the pandemic, when you looked at the OECD numbers back in September, I think, of 2019, the forecasts were very negative because of the trade confrontation between the larger blocs around the world, China, Europe, the US. Investment was done all over the Western world. So it had already started.
Aluminium also has the benefit of the supply being relatively predictable. So aluminium is not in the same way constrained by depleting ore reserves in nickel or copper, as an example. And I think the prices are also more or less more steady. And of course, from a producer's perspective who's thinking about substitution, this gives aluminium a certain advantage as well.